you're going to go to Yenlo's domain and he's going to perform a kind of sorting
Mm.
thing, and he has a big bureaucracy to do it. So you better have money with you so you can bribe the officials.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm going to be talking today about the collection of East Asian spirit money in the British Museum. This is often called hell money, sometimes ghost money, joss paper, death money. I'm generally going to refer to it as spirit money. They go by lots of different names. They're used in lots of different places around the world. There's a clear Chinese cultural connection to almost all examples you see, but these imitation banknotes are used widely across East Asia and even well outside East Asia. These are ovens in front of a temple in Malaysia, and very common practice. These big ovens will be set up, or they might be permanently established at the temple, and you will come and put the imitation money into the ovens to burn it, which is the main way in which people interact with this object. It's the ultimate sort of ephemera. People literally print it and then they burn it. I thought to illustrate the range of uses of this, these are actually YouTube videos using the money and burning it, but these are not Chinese in any sense at all. These are mixtures of voodoo, Christian, and New Age mysticism bundled up together, in which the people burn the money for specific life purposes. I want to get a better job. I'll ritually burn this money to do it. But they're using the same spirit money that is produced for festivals in East Asia, in China itself, in Taiwan, Indonesia, Burma. This is a little discussion of them from a novel called The Woman Warrior, right? And it talks about the huge variety. Spirit money is just one example of a huge range of paper phenomena where people will burn all sorts of things of value to, in some way, interact with the spirit world, either to send the money to ancestors or to pacify ghosts, or, as we've just sort of seen, to achieve some kind of spiritual merit or effect in this world. And we have some examples of this in the British Museum. This is a full-size motorcycle made of paper from the other collection that we do not talk about, the Asia department. So, because we all collect in our own little silos, over the years, the Asia department and the Money and Medals department have both collected this sort of ritual Chinese paper. The Asia department as a material manifestation of Chinese spiritual and religious beliefs. The Money and Medals department, because the things are paranumismatic, they look like money. But we haven't in the past done that in a very joined up way. So there's quite a bit of overlap. There are things we've collected that really would have made more sense there, and things they've collected which really duplicate ours. I'm going to be talking primarily about the Money and Medals collection, but just so you're aware that there is this second collection in the museum. I will occasionally quote from a book, Jocelyn Cohen's The Spirit and Craft of Chinese Ritual Papers. We have a copy here in the department. I'm not going to show you any pictures of this because the book itself is an artwork in its own right, and I didn't really want to do that without having sought permission from the author. It's handmade, so I think 5 copies that exist are all individually handmade copies of the same book. And we also have a large collection of ritual paper that Jocelyn Cohen donated to the department. And now I have to give an apology for the British Museum website. If you go onto the British Museum website and type Hell Money, that's the generic term that will tie it together in the database, you will find a lot of records, but only a very small number of images. Technically, all of the Hell Money is subject to copyright. The database flags that and blocks images from displaying on the website. Now, that's an overabundance of caution. Obviously, academic research use would be a natural exemption to that normal sort of copyright restriction, but the database just works like that, and yes, this is just a reminder that I'm not giving you legal advice about copyright here. But in my opinion, there's no good reason why we shouldn't have all the images of all of our examples online. But the only way that I can do that is to override the computer object by object on a case-by-case basis. And unfortunately, we're still in the process of digitizing a lot of the collection, and I don't have time to do that. So what I'm going to do today is hopefully show you quite a lot of photographs so you can at least see the bits of the collection that I have had the time to scan today, even if they won't be available for you to look at on the website. I'm going to begin with the very first piece of spirit money that the British Museum received. And this was presented to us in 1937. We didn't know we were getting it at the time. The collection that was presented by Mabbott, we clearly wanted because of the tokens that were in the collection. We very carefully recorded each token that came in quite a bit of detail. And then at the end of the register, there's a little note that says, plus 40 banknotes. And next to that, it gives a little list of countries, which doesn't even include China. So it's fairly clear that this was just in with the tokens, and somebody was like, well, I suppose we might as well have it. So this is both the first piece we've ever received and the oldest piece of spirit money that imitates a banknote in the collection, coming from the 1920s. We also have two pieces that we acquired decades later, which are clearly copies of the earlier piece, and also presumably made in the Republican period between the First and Second World Wars. And these, I think, immediately tell you why it's actually worth the British Museum, money and metals specifically, having a collection of this sort of material. It doesn't just look like money, it behaves like money. Just like you have a coinage tradition where coins look like other coins because they need to be acceptable, so spirit money needs to be recognizably both money, because you're burning it to create an associated concept of wealth, transferring wealth, but it also needs to look like other spirit money so that it's recognizably something that should be in that ritual context. And the fact that in the collection we have these later versions, which are clearly copies of the earlier versions, and that's something that happens a lot within the collection, shows why it's worth having as comprehensive a sample as possible of spirit money. We also get things that feature other elements. So here, Harold Wilson takes the place of the Jade Emperor as the guarantor for this note's value in the afterlife. But we retain the headquarters of the Bank of Hell on the reverse as the issuing authority. In 1951, Derek Allen was the closest equivalent would be Iron Age curator today. He obviously visited, I think, Hong Kong and brought back 3 pieces with him. And that included this Joss paper, which is very simple pieces of paper, usually with a bit of gold or silver foil pressed into the center. These are frequently used interchangeably with the spirit money sort of the more obviously imitation notes. And in fact, I've been told by some people that in some places you will get packs that will have one of the imitation notes on the top, and then the rest of the stack will be this simple joss paper. And some and you comes as a bundle, it's tied up, and it's often then has a design printed on the side on the block. So you squash it together, impress a design on the side, and then you throw the whole bundle in. And that's enormously variable. Some of the people I've found talk about individually origamiing individual notes and then burning them. And some people talk about just taking as big a bundle as you can and putting it into the fire in one go. I mean, I think that's a job for an anthropologist or a historian of religion, but I think there's a lot of complexity and variation to the actual ritual practice that's going on here. So this, from Derek Allen, this was the first time we ever deliberately acquired some spirit money. We also have some things that are similar and related. This is a common practice. You take sheets of paper, you stack them on top of each other, and you have a little stamp that produces an impression and a cut that looks a little bit like a cash coin. And so you can generate your own set of cash coins to then burn. And Cohen gives this description saying that the first, and she takes a very evolutionary approach. She assumes that this derives from the tendency to leave imitation items in burials in tombs in ancient China, and that over time, what you have are people making some of those things out of paper and then making things that are the shape of banknotes, and then ultimately making things that are imitation banknotes. So she sees it as a very evolutionary process. I'm not convinced it's quite as straightforward as that. I think some of these practices that you might think of as steps on the way may in particular places have actually originated later. It's very hard to tell because these are the classic example of an ephemeral product. You literally burn this, so it just doesn't survive. And textual descriptions are just never specific enough for you to really know what somebody means when they say, and we burnt paper money. You're like, well, what do you mean? Do you mean little coins? Do you mean imitation banknotes? Do you just mean pieces of paper? Right? People are very rarely specific enough when they're talking for us to get a sense of how old or how widespread this practice might have been. So by 1997, the museum had about 120 pieces of spirit money, which was a modest representation of the practice, but that's all. Then, in 1998, Owen Bayer very kindly donated 234 pieces he had collected in travels around East Asia. And also, like many of the people who very kindly have donated things over the years, he recorded for us where each piece was found, right, in which country it was in use. And this, almost overnight, tripled the size of the collection. So I'll just go through the basic iconography of spirit money. Obviously, at the most basic level, it looks like a banknote. It has many of the same features of contemporary banknotes or older banknotes for whoever is making it. It has a denomination. It has a portrait. If the banknotes in your local area do this, it tends to do the same, which is to have color on one side and a monochrome print on the other. That's very common. It specifies who the issuing authority is. There are many banks in hell, apparently, according to the notes, with many different names. I presume it operates something like Scottish banknotes, right? Where there are many banks that are individually allowed to authorize notes, and they do so on behalf of a single, right, underworld bureaucracy. The vast majority of notes, even when they are not made in China, feature classical Chinese characters. Very occasionally, we have notes with simplified Chinese. It's not at all uncommon to see notes that have Thai numerals on them, Burmese as well, but almost all notes contain classical Chinese characters. That Chinese cultural heritage ties them all together. I've been told by a Thai visitor that in Thailand it is only Thais with Chinese ancestors who engage in the practice, but I don't think that's universal. Certainly we see Burmese notes that are so overtly Buddhist, right, that you kind of assume it must be a broader Buddhist practice. They most feature a portrait of the Jade Emperor. It is the Jade Emperor, right, who authorizes the notes in general. So we've seen occasionally the Jade Emperor is replaced by a pop star or Harold Wilson. Lyndon Johnson, Marilyn Monroe also appear on notes. So, and on many notes, we have a depiction on the back, which is usually understood to be the headquarters of the Bank of Hell, which is the authority responsible for presumably the receipt of the notes at the other end once you've burnt them. And we usually get signatures and seals, and they are usually those of the Jade Emperor and those of Yen Lo, the King of Hell, acting as his deputy director for the purpose of issuing the notes. So again, this is very much an imitation of real-world banknote practice. We do get some things that are a little odd. We get some odd denominations. So this is an 800, right, with the Jade Emperor there, imitating the kind of vertical Chinese notes of the sort of 20s and 30s. And this is an 8.8 billion denomination note. This one, if I understand the little bit of Chinese on the left-hand side, it has a little explanation that this note will be valid until your reincarnation. So it's a very common feature. You will see the production of the notes and the details in them are often quite playful on behalf of the artists who are making them. The reason we get these is 8 comes up a lot, and 8 is obviously numerologically auspicious, right? The reverse is true. It's very rare to see 4 turning up on a note. 4 is generally avoided. The most popular denominations, I'm going to show you the 8 most popular denominations according to the British Museum's 640 notes that have actually gone into the database. These are 10, 100, 500, and 1,000. This is a very normal real-world distribution of denominations. But the second most popular denomination is actually 1 billion. And also in the top 8 are 10,000, 5 million, the 1 billion, and 10 billion. So we have 2 groups of denominations that are very popular. In total, we have examples of 49 different denominations. So we have a lot of, but these are by far the most popular. And of course, it raises the immediate question, which Joe was just discussing. If anybody in the mortal realm can print a note and have it authorized by one of the hell banks on behalf of Yen Lo and the Jade Emperor, what's to stop you just printing notes with more and more zeros on? And does this mean that the spirit world has an inflation problem? So this is Cohen giving one particular account of the metaphysics that's going on here. And the idea she presents, which she's received from an informant, is that in order to be born, you first of all have to buy that birth. But since you don't have any money before you're born, you have to go into debt to the treasury of the spirit world. And then when you die, you have 49 days to repay the debt. So your family has to gather enough of the spirit money and burn it so it can transfer to your account to repay your life loan that you took out at the start. So this is one of the metaphysics that's kind of operating. And what very common metaphysics is the idea that the spirit world works basically just like the real world works. And so you need money and things in it. And when you burn things, they appear, right, in the spirit world. Now, that isn't universal. That cannot be a universal metaphysics of it. Both of these notes are Buddhist. The note on the left has a very lengthy section on the back, exact details difficult to work out, but it's a fairly standard Mahayana style formula which assures you that the ritual practice you are about to engage in with this note is worth so much more than the ritual practices you normally engage in with statues and the like. And that's extremely common in the Mahayana. Whenever you're introducing a ritual practice, you say how much better it is than the previous ritual practice you did. And in this case, that you will gain spiritual merit via Amitabha. So the note itself appears to be, its metaphysics appears to be saying, if you burn this note now, you gain spiritual merit now that will benefit you, right, in your karmic cycle. And as I said, the voodoo practitioners, while I do not think they're anything like a large proportion of users, are clearly doing it to achieve immediate material world effects here. So perhaps we need some numismatic research on all of this. So we talked about inflation, and I made the remark, does the spirit world have an inflation problem? Well, the idea stems from an assumption that if we laid these things out in chronological order, we would see the values of the notes going up, like a real world inflation. But we've never actually done that. I don't know when most of these were made. This one has a date on it, but that's quite unusual for it to have a date. And unlike a real world, I mean, we're all familiar with examples of real world money that immobilize dates or give dates that have mistakes in them. But generally speaking, in the real world, we expect dates to be reasonably reliable. I'm not sure that we can extend the same courtesy to the spirit money. For example, the notes I showed you at the very beginning, right, which are Republican Chinese from between the wars. How confident would you have been about that if we'd acquired the note in the 1990s? I think I'd have had doubts about it genuinely being old, if not for the fact that we got it in 1937. Now, sometimes the notes do have information that allows you to pin them down. This was made between 1940 and 1970 in Hong Kong. That's because Wing King Tong Press Co. is not a made-up name for a Chinese company. It is an actual printing company in Hong Kong, which was founded in the early 40s, right? And Hong Kong stopped using 5-digit telephone numbers, right, a little bit before 1970. So, but it's very unusual that they used I'm reasonably confident they also made some of the notes we have which don't have their details on the back. So I think they made some that were advertising notes and some that were otherwise used. And whether or not they mixed them together in packets, I don't know. We have, to the best of my knowledge, 4 examples of these notes with the company's name on the back of them in the collection, which almost immediately brings me to another problem. When we had 120 of these, if somebody turned up and said, would you like these notes? It was very easy to say yes, because there's only 120. We'd know what we had. Now we've got more than 1,000 of these. it is very difficult to know whether or not we already have a note. And there isn't really a good reason to have two, right? So this is just between us in the room, the other ONS members online, and the entire internet when this gets posted on YouTube. But do not tell my head of department that he might be right and we might have collected a bit too much of this. This is another example of the Hong Kong types, different design, but again, made by the same company. Now, I've made it worse because I've stored all of these objects by their date of acquisition, which is an appallingly unnumismatic way to store objects. They are literally stored from 1937 to the most recent one in 2025. However, it makes life much, much easier for my colleagues when they need to find one. But it does bring us to this problem here. This is Numista has about 100 examples of hell money on it. This is one of them. And the obvious question is, do we have an example of that note in the BM? I mean, I suppose I could sit with the picture and look at all 1,000 notes we already have. Of course, had I organized them typologically, I could simply have compared them with other notes that look like dollars, right? Which, of course, is why we organize most of the collection typologically. It's not any of these three. But these three all have an interesting feature. They all have a serial number on them. Now, this is not a serial number in the way a banknote serial number is, where there's a single banknote design and every individual note is then secondarily printed with a separate serial number. Every piece of hell money from a particular print comes with the same serial number. Now, you might quite reasonably think, and a colleague here who has engaged in this practice in Hong Kong did think, until we looked at it, that all of the serial numbers would essentially be the same because they'd be numerologically significant: 888, 888, 988. They're all, you'd maybe have 4 or 5 different numbers, but they'd all essentially be repeating the same number. It turns out not, right? We now have more than 400 different serial numbers listed for these. So when I am finished scanning and checking every note, it should in principle be possible to build a catalog around the serial number, which would allow you to look up relatively quickly, if you have a specific piece of spirit money, whether or not there already is an example in the collection. And just to answer the question earlier, no, we do not have a copy of this. However, I believe it was part of a group, and groups often have either the same serial number or serial numbers with very small variations. We have a 10,000 in the same style, I believe, working from the same base pattern plates for the green with that serial number, but not to the best of my knowledge of 5,000. So I won't know for certain until I've finished actually recording everything. I thought at the very end, since you're not going to be able to look at any of these online afterwards, I would just show you, amongst the ones I've scanned, some of the more fun and pretty examples. So here we have what I assume is a slightly unusual one, where the Jade Emperor is accompanied by Yen Lo in the portrait. So director and deputy director of the bank together. And we also have the little mahjong tiles in the background. Just to be clear, the doubling of the image is just an error with aligning the plates. It's not some sort of sophisticated security feature that the Hell Bank employs. Somebody did ask me that. They were like, is that deliberate? Are they trying to make it harder to copy the notes? We get some very colorful lovely examples, right, from Burma and Thailand, right, which often then use local numerals alongside the Chinese. These are amongst some of the prettiest ones in the collection. We also have some things which are not notes. So we have checkbooks, right? And for those people who are old enough to remember using these with your bank account, a passbook in which you record your deposits and withdrawals. Presumably very important if you don't want to carry around a large bundle of cash once you're in the spirit world and you want to actually deposit. We have a whole set that imitate the different series of People's Republic of China notes down to the 1980s. These are the diversity and unity notes, I think they're called, where they show different peoples from around China. Are they late 70s, early 80s? This group of spirit money notes, it's part of a large group, actually has different denominations, and each denomination has an example from a different series of the PRC's money. And sometimes you also get this, which I picked this one out for, which is this is marked heaven banknote. So generally speaking, I've referred to these as spirit money because I think it's a fairly neutral term. The notes themselves usually call themselves hell banknotes, right? So the notes themselves say hell, but a lot of people, when they first encounter the term, feel that it gives a misleading impression of what's going on, since this is really the afterlife in a much more general sense rather than a place of punishment. And you will see occasionally notes reflecting that for particular audiences by referring to themselves as heaven notes, or occasionally one of the banks refers to itself as the Bank of Heaven and Chthonic, which is an interesting translation of the Chinese, which is usually translated heaven and earth. Sometimes you get the notes referencing other symbols of value, and you can get, so these are ingots and pieces of gold and gems being vomited up by the dragon lion thing, and so you'll often find these on, and you can also get these in paper to burn. So we have a set that has ingots and cash coins, right, together in a little presentation box, and the whole thing is paper. And the not apparent from the slides, the paper is very specific. This is not banknote paper in most cases. It's a sort of tissue paper. And I presume that's because it burns better. We also get a variety of Buddhist ones. Most Buddhist ones still have the Jade Emperor on and still look like the other notes, but occasionally you get things that are more overtly, sometimes they're signed by Sakyamuni Buddha as the chief executive of the bank. I wanted to say a quick thank you to all of the people who've helped create the collection, not just for their generosity in donating their examples to the museum, but also because almost all of them went to enormous amounts of trouble to record exactly the kind of information that would be useful now, 20 or 30 years later, but just sat in the folders for a very long time. And they where they got it, when they got it, who else they ran into. We have little notes in the collection saying, I ran into such and such who was also collecting, right? I'm afraid I've only got you 50 notes, right? Because I didn't think, and I saw this other collector, and they'd got a pram with them, so they could. And I wish I'd thought about it. I'm very sorry, but we're enormously grateful to all of the people who have donated material to the collection. I'd also like to thank Winnie Poon and Issa Fraser, who for the last couple of weeks have put up with me bending their ears about the collection while I've been working on it. And thank you very much, everybody here and online, for listening.